Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled German early production Tiger 1. Since the last project update video, a lot of progress has been made to the tank's rear grillwork area, as well as the top deck of the vehicle. We'll be going over these additions and modifications in this video. Starting with the tank's top deck plating, on this pattern of the Armortek Tiger 1, the top deck is divided into two segments. This was discussed and touched upon briefly in some of the earlier updates and also in the unboxing. Unlike the very first incarnations of the Armortek Tiger 1 kit, that vehicle would have had the entire top deck plating as one integral piece of laser cut steel. As the kit was further developed, the design was changed, and the material was changed over from steel to aluminum alloy, and also the entire rear deck was actually separated from the remainder of the top deck. By doing this, the Armortek kit has the rear deck actually sunk into the rear portion of the hull, and once the grillwork gets added, gives you the correct height for these added components. By doing this design, the kit also removes the need to having an inner frame, which gets mounted to the inside and prevents the engine hatch from falling in. This type of pattern is found and discussed in more detail in the last Tiger 1 video that I completed about a year ago, in which that vehicle was a kit from the first generation pattern. This pattern here has been the standard for Armortek kits for a number of years now, and again was introduced, I want to say, in the later portion of the 2000s with Armortek's first incarnation of their late production German Tiger 1. Since then, the rest of the following kits all followed the same format. Other than the material change and also the change of the basic design, the remainder of the rear plating is very similar to the original pattern. And what I mean by that is that we have here basically a box frame that has all of the cutouts for the intake grill, the radiator covers, and also the fan guards as well. On the back here we have the section for the hatch hinge, and of course the middle section here is for the engine hatch. Everything is all laser cut, and all of the fastener location holes are present. Now, the grillwork that you see on this model here is the current rendition that are found on the most recent releases of the Armortek Tiger 1. These grillworks here are similar to the ones found on the previous generation, but are slightly improved. The grillwork found on the very first generation look very similar to these, but there's some differences, namely with, of course, the material that they're made in. The very first generations, these parts here were all made from cast metal alloy, while these units that came afterwards were all made from CNC billet aluminum. Now, size and spec-wise, these units here are identical to the ones found on the previous CNC generation of these kits. Where these kits, though, are improved have to do with the filler caps. This is a very nice addition that Armortek made to their kits, and in the past was one that I would have to fabricate myself. Rather than having the filler cap be integrally CNC'd onto the grillwork, they actually have this piece drilled out and it's pre-threaded. Just like what was showcased before, there are these CNC'd brass filler caps, and they simply just thread directly into place, just like on the real vehicle. Now, why this is important on this build specifically is because on these builds, I go ahead and utilize this location here for refilling of the tank's smoke system. So getting access to what would be the fuel tank underneath is definitely beneficial. Same can also be said for the radiator covers themselves. Since this tank does have a interior detailing compartment for the fan work as well as the engine, having the piece removable is a nice asset because then you get a chance to see and view the detailing which would be underneath. Now, another bit of detailing which has been supplied with the more recent renditions of the Armortek Tiger 1 have to do with the grill covers. As you can see, the Armortek kit supply you with a nice photo etch sheet of the grill covers, as well as a few of the other little bits of odds and ends which I've described in earlier videos. The grill covers themselves are, again, another nice addition that have been recently added to these kits, and is one that is very welcome because in the past, one would either have to fabricate this by hand or acquire it from an aftermarket source. Now, what's very interesting is that the Armortek ones are very similar in concept and even in production quality to the 1/16 scale ones, which are from Tagen. Now, I'm not saying that Armortek copied Tagen or vice versa. It's just the nature of these components with this type of medium. The only difference, though, is that with the larger scale, you do get the benefit of having the ability to fold these sections over here, which will come into effect shortly enough when I go over the completed sections of the Grillwork. Now, another nice benefit is that with these components over here, specifically these new redesigned grill covers, is that they are backwards compatible with the other Armortek kits that have been released in the past. So if anyone obtains a Armortek Tiger 1 either secondhand or a virgin kit release from the early 2000s, you can actually retrofit those kits with these up-to-date components, and the pieces should basically just drop in. More so, in my opinion, on the later CNC'd renditions as opposed to the first generation release, but it is something that is doable and something to keep in mind for anyone that encounters one of these older kits in the wild. The first bit of grill work that I'm going to modify and improve the detailing on are the main intakes. Now, the fan intakes, the first thing that I do is I segment out the vertical lines. Now, this is something that I do on all of these Armortek builds, as well as also on many of the smaller scale builds as well, because they all feature a similar feature when it comes to the main intake grills. On the real Tiger 1, the vertical sections that we have here in these three locations do not make full contact with the outer frame. On the two on the top over here, these two portions would be segmented out, and the other segment would be over here on the third one, which comes off of the main filler cap spindle. Now, on the Armortek kit, just like, again, with the other smaller kits, that's not the case, and they're all connected, and this is true for all of the Armortek Tiger 1s that have been produced. Now, when it comes to the segmented spindles, this is not a freak thing, and is found on all of the Tiger 1 variants that were ever produced, in the same locations. Now, this unit that we have here is stock. The only thing we have here are some Sharpie lines that I added to mark the points that need to be segmented out. And this unit here has the segments completed. Now I'm going to go over the procedure and how to actually do this, as it's a very simple procedure, but once done will definitely be appreciated. A similar procedure is also going to be done to the fan grills as well. Now, to do the procedure, you're going to need a large diameter vise, as you really need to clamp these units in place to prevent them from rattling around on you during the cutting procedure. A second tool is going to be a Dremel. Now, for the Dremel, I will be utilizing two type of bits. I have here a fiberglass type cutting stone, and there's also going to be a small micro router bit. Another tool that's going to be used is a file. Now, you're going to need a somewhat special file for this procedure. The reason why I say that has to do with the type of thicknesses that are going to be removed on these sections over here. If you use a traditional file like this one over here, you're going to see that it's going to be far too thick in order to get into the section to sand it down. The file I have here is a very, very thin one, and is perfect for this type of procedure. Now, if anyone is thinking about using something like a needle file, you're definitely going to be undergunned. A needle file is not recommended because it is just far too small and too precise for an application like this, and it's one of those things where you'll try to use it and you'll be sanding away on a certain section for hours on end. Definitely not recommended for this procedure. The first tool I'm going to use is the router bit. Now, while I'm putting the bit onto the Dremel, I do want to point out that the aluminum alloy that these grills are made in are very, very strong and durable, but they're not as strong as something like steel, so using a Dremel like this is capable of doing the job. However, prolonged use will eventually, of course, wear out your Dremel. Now, to further help with the material removal, I'm going to go ahead and add a drop of oil to the tool. The oil helps with, of course, keeping the bit nice and cool, and it also keeps it nice and sharp. One thing about this type of material is that when you start using a rotary type bit removal tool like this, the aluminum will start clunking up inside of the small little cuts and lands and grooves on the bit, and it'll just clunk it up, and you're not going to be cutting anymore. The oil helps reduce this type of situation from happening. Now, in case anyone's wondering, can you use the cutting stone for this removal solely instead of using this bit? And the answer is yes, you can. The reason why I'm using this bit, however, has to do with the thickness of the bit compared to the thinness of the cutting stone blade. If you use the cutting stone, again, you will be able to cut through this material, but it will require a few more passes in order to get the thickness required for this piece. So if you do want to do this procedure, but the only removal tool that you have access to are cutting stones, you can still perform the exact same operation. Now, as you can see, the router bit did remove a good bit of material, but there's still a little bit left remaining. For that little bit remaining, that will be taken care of with the cutting stone. And once the segment is fully removed, it is then time to square everything off with the file. This is where the thinness of the file comes into handy. With a little bit of elbow grease, I'm going to go ahead and polish everything down. And once this one is wrapped up, I'll do the exact same procedure to the two on the back. And here go the segments now added. From here, the grills can now go into their next step, which I'll go over in a minute. Now, like what was mentioned on the main fare intake grills, on the rear hinged grills, some modifications need to be made as well. First and foremost, the segments need to be cut in these areas that we see over here. Just like with the other Grillwork, where they are segmented from the frame on those several locations. On this section here of the grill, it's a similar procedure. Now, unlike the other grills, which really just needed the segments to be cut, on these rear grills here, I'm going to be incorporating a little bit more hand fitting, as well as a little bit more modifications. In addition to segmenting out these sections over here, I'm also going to be amputating out the integrally CNC'd hook block and replacing it with one of my own resin ones. The reason for that has to do with the geometry of this piece. The one that's integrally CNC'd into the unit, while very strong, is a little bit on the basic end, and I'm going to be replacing with the resin one just because the resin one has better detailing compared to the stock offering. In addition to that, there's also some geometry tweaks I'm going to be making to it, namely that of the edges here. How you can see it's a nice sharp corner. On the real Tiger one, these are actually very, very soft in their geometry, and I'm going to go ahead and blunt those off. Furthermore, another mod I'm going to make has to do with the bottom section over here of the hinge work. You'll notice that it's a straight 90-degree cut, and I always feel these operate a little bit better if I go ahead and add a radius cut to these with a file. Now, in comparison, here we have one unit that's stock, and this unit here has already undergone the transformation process. The first thing that is going to be reworked on the rear grille is going to be the removal of the hinge. Now, like I said before, it is integrally machined into the Grillwork, and the best way to remove it, in my opinion, is with a mill. Now, this can be removed with a Dremel, but it will take a few passes to do, of course, and we'll put some added wear and tear on the Dremel. But it is, again, a procedure that can be done if a mill like this one here is not had. Before I start cutting and making chips, the only prep work I'm going to do is add a little bit of oil to the surface area and also to the drill bit, and then from there I can actually go ahead and start removing material. And here you can see how the mill made short work of the hinge. I am now going to focus on segmenting out these sections over here, which is going to be done with the exact same procedure that I used on the larger sections of the grill. And after a little bit of elbow grease, the incisions are now cut. Now it's from this point here where I'm going to go ahead and start modifying the radiuses of the other parts that I mentioned before. Again, this is going to be done all with the file. And here's one side done. You can see how the radius has changed compared to the stock point that we have here. Now for adding the radiuses to the bottom portion of the Grillwork, I'm going to be utilizing the file, but I'm going to start with a Dremel. The purpose with the Dremel is this does save a lot of time in having to file the corners away. The Dremel is going to alleviate a lot of this, and then the file is going to be used just to finish everything up. With the Dremel work out of the way, it's now time to finish it off with the file. Now, one thing I forgot to mention was that before doing any of these type of procedures that I've showcased within the last few couple scenes, you want to wear good protection. This would include a good respirator to prevent any of this aluminum filings, as well as even the cutting stone fragments to get into your lungs. Also, you want to wear a nice set of safety glasses for obvious reasons. With all the particulate running around, you really don't want this in your eye. Anyway, back to the filing. In addition to cutting the radiuses, I'm also going to hand fit the hinge work to the radiator guard cover. Here's the component totally stock. As you can see, it does fit, but is a little bit on the snug side. With a file, I'm going to go ahead and remove certain areas over here on the hinge work just to loosen up the tolerances just enough so that the piece can pivot with a lot more ease. Again, this is going to be done 100% by hand, as you don't want to use a machine for this because the risk of oversanding. And there we have it. Once the metal work is all done on the pieces, I then go on to the next modification that I tend to make on these 1/6 scale Armortek grills. That has to do with the thickness of the grill work itself. Now on the Armortek kit, you can see that the grill is just the overall thickness of the frame that we have here. And this is true for both the rear grills as well as the front grills as well. However, on the real Tiger 1, the grills were actually a lot more pronounced than the way they're represented on this model here. The way that you see the grills on this model here are basically what is commonly done on other model kits on the market, from the FOA 1/6 scale vehicle to also the Tamiyas, as well as many of the other smaller scale vehicles out there. However, some vehicles like the Dragon Tiger 1 series, as well as I believe the Rye model design kits that are out there, the ones that are really super detailed, those kits tend to have the grills in their correct format. And that's a procedure that I'm going to do to this build as well. Now that procedure is already done to these two grills that we have here. If we look from the top, you'll see that the grill work looks basically the same. However, where the difference comes in is when you look at the grill work from underneath and from the cross section. You'll notice just how much thicker these grills are compared to the standard thickness found on the Armortek kit. Now the way this is achieved is that I have a resin copy of the Armortek grill work that I use primarily and only for this procedure that we have here. Here I have one of the resin castings, and basically it's just the center grills, and I simply just glue this component to the inside portion, and like that, the piece is now doubled up, giving you the correct thickness for the Tiger 1 grill. Now, the reason why I go and add this detailing here is because, in my opinion, the grill work thicknesses are noticeable, specifically in the scale that these tank kits are represented in. When you walk up to one of these vehicles and you stare into the grill work, in 1/6 scale, the grill depth is definitely going to be something that is going to be noticed. Also, because this tank does have the detailed fan and radiator compartments, again, this type of detailing is definitely going to be something that's par for the course. Moving our way to the radiator guards themselves, the pieces are actually very well done, and outside of adjusting some of the geometry on the edges over here, they're just going to be getting some coating of cast texturing, and then they're basically good to go. Now, to touch upon what I was saying before, just like with the fan, the rear sections of the grill work over there, the pieces here have nice sharp angles to them, and on the real Tiger 1 they are slightly a little bit more softer due to the casting that the pieces are actually made in. And on this unit here, I went ahead and revised the geometry slightly to get that more rounded, blunt shape. The same exact procedure will be done to the other guard over here, and then the cast section will be applied. Now, as for the technique, this is done with the exact same technique that I showcased before for the fan guards, only this one here, it's all done with a file. No power tools are really necessary in order to just polish down the edges that we see here. After the cast texturing is added to the grill work, it's then time to mount on the photo wedge grills. Now, the grill covers themselves I showcased before when they were attached to the runner, and here goes the grill now clipped off, and the pieces have been bent. Now, what's nice is that the Armortek kit has the crease lines pre-integrally etched onto the brass, which makes bending of the pieces in a nice, simple, very fluid type motion. You use your vise and you just clamp the piece in and bend down. A rubber mallet is recommended just to help flatten the piece to get a nice crisp edge. Once the piece is all bent up, it is then time to mount it to the grill work. The way this is done is with some super glue. I simply just CA the grill work to the grill base, and then I hold everything together with rubber bands. Once the rubber bands dry, I will then go ahead and add sculpted weld beads to certain locations. The weld beads are going to be serving two functions. First, it's of course detailing, which is found on these pieces, but it also adds a little bit more structure, and it adds a lot more surface area where the components mount onto the grill body, thus making for a nice, stronger component. As you can see, with the way when you first mount it on, you are going to have some gap work present. Now, this is not an error. This is actually as per the real Tiger 1, as these grill works were very similar to this on the real vehicles, which is why they were then tack welded into place. Now moving on to the larger grills, the same procedure is applied, namely that with the photo etch mesh covers. They get bent in the same format to create this little box frame that we have here. Now, the one difference between the grills in the front versus the two fan blowout grills in the back has to do with the second layer of mesh. If we notice here that in addition to the box frame, there is a smaller weave varmint mesh type pattern that gets sandwiched in between the box frame and the grills themselves. The purpose of this has to do with the holes. The Germans felt that even with the guard covers on, the holes were still significant enough where for an object either be man-made or some kind of accidental, like a building or something, like a brick or something like that, can still fit into the little squares here and fall inside of the engine grills. And to thwart that, that's why there's the second finer weave of mesh. Now, it's important to point out that this mesh here is only found on these grills. They are not found on the two fan blowout grills found on the rear portion of the vehicle. So it's something to keep in mind for anyone who's incorporating this type of detailing on their Tiger 1 builds. With the fan grills out of the way, the next area I'm going to focus on is the rear deck plate. Now, this here is going to be kept predominantly stock. However, I am going to be making some modifications to these two locations that you see here that are marked with the Sharpie. These marked areas are going to be amputated and deleted, and the reason for that has to do with the modifications that I made to the fan grills that I mentioned before. With the thickening procedure, in which the bottom portion of the grills descend down from the frame, they are going to make contact with these two areas that we have over here on the rear deck plate. Now, it's important to point out that on the real Tiger 1, these sections here are not present, and because of that, that's why on the real tank you see the type of thicknesses of these components, and they do not inhibit or make contact with any sort of obstructions found on the top deck plate. As on the real tank, all of this is actually a framework that is welded and milled into the armor, but now I'm beginning to digress. For the model here, I'm simply going to cut these sections away with a Dremel with a cutting stone, and once the pieces are removed, a file is going to be used to go ahead and deburr and smooth out these sections to a nice smooth manner. And here are all the grill work now fully completed and ready for their base coat. The reason why they're going to be painted at this point here as opposed fully mounted onto the tank has to do with, just like with the road wheels, as well as some of the other components that I mentioned in these videos. Because of the way these pieces are designed, there's a lot of nooks and crannies that you're just not going to be able to get fully painted if the piece is mounted to the vehicle. This is why for stuff like grill work, I like to pre-paint the components while they're off of the model, which gives me plenty of freedom to go ahead and get access to all of the locations. From that point then, I can then fasten it to the tank, and there won't be any worries of there being a missed paint spot. Starting with the main grill work, now that it's all in one shade of red primer, you can see exactly how the pieces will look once fully mounted. There go the spot welds that have been added to the rims. And you can also really appreciate more the descending portion of the grills, as well as the very rough cast texturing that was added. Now, if anyone watching this is thinking to themselves, wow, that cast texturing looks a little bit overdone, the answer is really not. I've seen the real German tanks in person. Now, granted, it wasn't a Tiger 1, it was a King Tiger and a Panther. However, I will say that the grill castings are unbelievably crude in person. And this cast texturing that we have here would be exactly like this on the real vehicles that I've personally seen. Once the pieces are fully painted, because of the texturing, this will give you a nice little detail edge, specifically when viewing the model in person. These details will pop out and will really make the tank look a lot more realistic compared to leaving it totally smooth. Same exact thing was also done on these grills as well. Now, like I said before, in an earlier take, the rear grills do not have the smaller mesh weave that is found on the main gas tank cover grills that we have here. Also, here you can see the new replacement hatch retaining latch that I added. This set here is the recent ones from eastcoastarmory.com, and were simply mounted directly in place over the Armortek ones, which were, if we can recall, totally milled away and deleted flush. When it comes to the radiator covers, these receive really the most minor amount of tweaks and revisions. Like I said before, just some radius alterations, and then a nice coat of cast texturing was all that was required to finish the piece off. Now, of course, once the grills are fully painted, it's now time for assembly and installation. Now, for the assembly, the pieces are hinged together because they do function like they do on the real tank. This is also true for all the other Armortek Tiger 1 builds that have been released since the company's founding. Now, the way this is done is with 2 of these hardened steel pins. The pins are supplied with the kit and are a very nice quality. They simply get tapped and drifted into their holes, and once seated in, the piece is fully articulated. Now, one thing to point out that I noticed on this particular build is that the holes that enter into the hinge section over here are slightly shorter than the pin. Because it is, if you try to assemble the part out of the box, you're going to have about a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch of the pin ascending from the hinge section over here. On the real tank, these should be flush. Now, the way to fix this is very simple. You just take a drill bit with the same diameter of the pin, put in the drill press, and you just bore out slightly deeper into the hinge section. Now, specifically, the bit that is the size of the pin is 5/32. I have one of those bits in my drill press at this point, and I'm going to drill it out. Now, this is something that you really do need a drill press to do. This can theoretically be done on a vise with a hand drill, but you do have to have some extra precaution that when you're drilling the hole out, you want to go in a nice straight line. If you're off or canted in any which way, this can cause some issues. Now, luckily, the amount of material being removed is not a whole lot. You're not exactly boring through the whole hinge piece. You're just drilling in about, again, an 1/8 of an inch into this section over here. Put it in the drill press, and I just start the removal. And that's really all that's required. I do the same thing to the opposite side. And that's it. For the installation, you want to use a rubber mallet like this one over here. A hammer can be used in its place. It's not really going to change anything. You just line up the hinge work, and you start punching in the pins. Once the rod starts going through, the holes are going to start indexing with each other and lining up. You then just tap away until the pin is now fully seated. Do the same thing to the opposite side, and the procedure is then completed. Once the piece is fully hinged together, the hinge work is very precise, and no amount of material needs to be removed from these 2 sections over here in order to hand fit them in place. You just drill out the pieces a little bit further and install as you would out of the box. It is at this point now where I can go ahead and get these 2 components as well as the other grill sections mounted to the rear engine deck. Once all of the filing and grinding is out of the way, it is then time to get the plate into primer. Now, for the actual fasteners that are supplied with the Armortek kit for mounting the grills on, the kit is very nicely done in that they give you the actual square-headed fasteners that are used exclusively on the Tiger 1s for this application. On the real tanks, the pieces were held on with not your average type of bolt. They had a square head on them as opposed to a hex or an Allen. Now, these have been included with the Armortek kits since around 2010 or so, and it's a edition that is nicely done. In fact, in the past, people would have to acquire these as an aftermarket source, and now these are just supplied with the kits. Also, Armortek does have these sold separately, so in case you have an older Armortek kit and feel the need and the urge to replace the stock fasteners, which on the older tanks would have been cap screws, with these correct fasteners here, you can just contact them and they could sell you a bag of the parts. With the engine deck out of the way, it is now time to focus on the main top deck. Now, the top deck that you see here is not purely stock. I went ahead and made some alterations to it just prior to the filming of this take. And those alterations have to do with the way the top deck is going to be mounted to the vehicle. Now, the way the kit is designed is that you have a few of these countersunk fasteners across the top of the span of the lid, and these will then be bolted to angle pieces which are fastened to the tank. Once everything is mounted as per the kit, the top deck is permanently attached to the lower hull, and you can't take it off. Now, one feature that I like to incorporate on these RC tanks is the ability to get access to the insides, and the reason for this should be pretty simple to explain, is that because it's radio controlled, you need to get some kind of access to all the machinery just in case you need to get access for, again, maintenance or repairs. And to do that, that is best done with the top deck removed. Now, if anyone's building one of these things out of the box, you can get some pretty good access into the hull simply due to the large circumference here of the turret diameter hull. But in my experience, it's just easier, it's much more easier with the entire deck off of the vehicle than with trying to manhandle everything through the roof, basically like the way the Germans did in real life. Now, the way I like to do the fastening has to do with making everything as seamless as possible. This means no external fasteners are going to be seen on the vehicle, again, for detail purposes. But the top deck still needs to be mounted to the tank in a temporary manner. Well, the way I do this is with magnets. Now, on the earlier renditions of the Armortek Tiger 1, this is actually fairly simply done. You mount magnets to the inside of the hull, and since the top deck on those first generation Tigers was made of steel, you would stop after you go ahead and mount the magnets, as the steel will just click onto the magnets and you're done. However, when they switch to the aluminum alloy, this now adds a little bit more work to do, in that you have to make locking points that will fasten to the metal magnets that are mounted in the hull. Now, the magnets have already been mounted to the vehicle that I'm going to be showing in the next scene. However, for the top deck that we have here, before we get into primer, I might as well show the magnet mounts that we have fitted now to the top deck. The magnets that I use are the types used for cabinetry found in home improvement stores, and the supplied clip that we have here was mounted to the aluminum plate. This is done with a fastener, and the fasteners are threaded directly into the deck. I drill out the deck where the fasteners need to go, I thread the section with a tap and die, and then the part just gets bolted on. Now, there is some fastener thread still showing through the surface. These, of course, will be cut away with a Dremel, and the rest of it will be polished away with some body work. You can see the location of the pads. I have two on the two long sections of the sides, and then two more mounted in the front. With this type of orientation, this should be more than enough to keep the top deck secure onto the vehicle, not to mention once the once the turret goes on, it's going to keep everything firmly in place. From the top deck, this now brings us to the turret mounting ring. Now, for anyone who's an avid fan of the ECA channel and watches these Armortek builds, you'll notice that this component here is very much different and is totally alien compared to the other builds that have been released in the past. This is actually the first time I've come across one of these turret mounting rings, so let's go over it in the video. On previous builds, Armortek would utilize a brass bushing that would be fastened to the top of the deck, and the turret would slide into the bushing and would glide over the surface, and that's how the turret would pivot and rotate. The system worked very well, and is actually the system that Armortek has been using from their second generation all the way up until apparently 2015. Instead of using the brass ring on this generation kit here, they went ahead and developed this ball bearing type mounting unit. some of the advantage that this system has is that it is very smooth because you are rolling on ball bearings. It's very reminiscent to the actual turret rings that are found on the real Tiger 1. And it is a very nice piece of engineering. The machining is very nicely made, and the ball bearings are nested inside. In fact, it boggles the mind how this piece was actually built. I'm not sure if this was made in-house by Armortek or if this is something that was acquired on the commercial scene. Either way, the quality is very nicely made. Now, one of the key differences between this setup compared to the brass bushing ring has to do with the way the turret mounts to this. Now, like I said before, on the older Armortek designs, the turret would simply just slide onto the roof into the bearing, or the bushing I should say, and it was just held on with gravity. There were no fasteners or any type of physical item that held the turret to the tank. Just the weight of the turret was enough to seat it properly into its place, and this system does work and is very effective. On this unit here, however, Armortek went ahead and replaced that system with one that now requires you to fasten the turret to the top of the deck. Now, personally, I do have some reservations about this. First and foremost, the system will work regardless. That's not anything to worry about at hand. However, when it comes time for maintenance and getting access to the inside portion of the vehicle, this design here does leave a little bit to be desired, in my opinion. The reason why I say that is if you have one of the older generations and you need to get access to the batteries or to any sort of machinery, you just simply grab the turret and lift it off, and you're done. However, with this setup here, the unit is bolted now to the top deck. Now, I'm probably going to engineer some kind of a release mechanism so that you can mount the turret to the ring, but have the capability to remove the turret if need be. However, unlike the other vehicles, which is basically simple, the only thing you have to worry about are the electrical connections. With this one here, you are going to have to probably undo some wing nuts or some fasteners in addition to unplugging the electronics in order to remove the turret. But more information on that is to, of course, follow in the next video or two updates. However, the reason why I'm bringing it up at this point here is because the top deck is now going to go through its priming procedure. After that, this ring here will be fitted. Now, I'm not going to add any sort of primer or paint to this ring. In fact, I'm probably going to add some drops of oil to the ball bearings just to help them pivot and run in a much smoother manner than they already do now. And here's the top deck now with its coat of primer, and the turret ring has now been fastened. The ring gets bolted on via these fasteners over here, which were integrally mounted not only to the top deck, but are also found on the ball bearing ring itself, and the installation went by very smooth. One change that I did do had to do with the type of fasteners that were requested. On the actual kit instructions, for these fasteners that hold and secure the ring to the top deck, it wanted me to utilize standard hex bolts. However, the kit is designed and has these sections drilled out for countersink screws. I went ahead and swapped out the stock fasteners with the countersunk ones, which make for a nice flush appearance, and it's something that is not going to stick up for the turret to possibly make contact with. Another change that I did was I added a small little spring washer to the bottom section here before I put on the fastener and torqued it down. Of course, red Loctite is utilized, but that goes without saying for all the fasteners pretty much on this build. The spring washer is just like a lock washer, and it's something that I like to do on these builds. It gives you a little bit more extra securement and prevents the fastener from loosening further, even from beyond what the Loctite has to offer. From that now wraps up this portion here, and I can now progress with the remainder of the top deck functions and detailing. And here's the top deck and the engine deck now mounted to the model. And here you can see the turret rotation ball bearing ring in action with the context of it being mounted to the vehicle. From this point on, I can now complete the rear hatch area as well as the FIFO system, and then move my way towards the front, completing the other detailing that is found on this section over here. This, however, of course, will be discussed in the next project update video that will be posted, hopefully not too long after this video drops. Now, like I said in one of the previous scenes that the top deck is held on to the lower with no fasteners. It's held on exclusively with magnets. If I give a good pull, the top deck is removed off of the main body. With the top deck removed, you can see the magnet system now added. For the magnets, like I mentioned before, these are using cabinetry magnets. These are the double wide ones, which give you more magnetic force compared to the single versions that are found, again, in hardware stores. Now, if you notice, it is attached to the model in 3 locations. You have 2 running along the sides and 1 along the front over here. Now, to mount these, I went ahead and modified the way the kit design was configured for mounting on the top deck. Like I said before, the top deck was originally designed so that it fastens to these pieces of angle mounts that are fastened to the side of the hull. To modify them for the magnet use, I went ahead and used these now as a mounting point for this aluminum angle over here, which the magnets then firmly are fastened to. This is a nice, simple system to utilize. You don't have to add any more holes to the vehicle, and you're using pre-existing parts. Now, if you notice, the rear engine deck area is not connected to the main top deck. The reason why I did this is twofold. First, the way the Armortek kit is designed, the engine deck and the top deck are, again, 2 separate pieces. Because of that, this made this mounting system a lot easier. Now, if I was to go ahead and make the top deck one integral section, this does have some disadvantages to it. First and foremost, it now makes the top deck section much larger and also heavier and more cumbersome to maneuver in case the need ever comes to get access to the equipment. Now, keep in mind, the majority, actually all of the tank's main mechanical functions are firewall forward on this vehicle, and this area here is really left solely for detailing purposes. Because of that, the necessity for this area here to be removed is just not as important for the main half of the section. I could also say from personal experience that if this section was mounted to the top deck, if it ever comes time to remove it, the added weight and complexity of the grillwork detailing does make the top deck in general a lot more fragile and a lot more difficult to, again, maneuver and remount when necessary. And since the Armortek kit has these components split, it does make this procedure a lot more beneficial. Now, the engine deck area is still removable even though it's not connected to the main deck. The way this is held on is via 2 fasteners located underneath the rear fan grills that we have here in the back. If I hinge them up, you'll be able to see the fastener in question. Now, getting a closer view of the mounting fastener, this section over here on the top deck was left stock, as the Armortek kit does utilize this location for mounting the rear section to the rear of the vehicle. This is true for basically all of the Armortek Tiger 1s. Now, one thing that was changed had to be the mounting bracket itself. Now, the Armortek kit is originally designed that you need to have a securing nut on the inside that sandwiches on a piece of angle steel, and that's how the rear deck gets fitted to the vehicle. However, I could say from personal experience that trying to get access to this little fastener on the inside is very problematic, and you are going to be dropping nuts on the inside of the vehicle if you ever need to get access to this point here. With that in mind, I went ahead and changed the system where I modified the bracket and utilized a new bracket that has a smaller hole that has been tapped with the threads. With this, the fastener simply just threads directly into place, and there's no need for the extra nut that's required on the other end. By doing this, this makes the rear deck simpler to put together, and it's also simpler to remove. And of course, this system is a mirror image on the opposite side of the model. Now, once the FIFO system gets mounted, the fan hinge area is not going to be as accessible, and so the tubes are going to have to be modified in a way to be removable so access can be granted to these 2 locations over here, but this will be discussed in the next video update. Now, in case if anyone was wondering that if these 2 small fasteners in the back are going to be enough to keep everything in place, you have to keep in mind that the 2 fasteners are just for the 2 rear sections of the engine deck. The remainder of the engine deck is sandwiched underneath the main top deck, which is held on with the very strong magnets. Furthermore, on top of that, you will have the heavy mass and weight of the turret once fitted That combined with the top deck, as well as the 2 fasteners, should be more than enough to keep everything firmly at bay and prevent anything from moving or shifting during the model's operation. And with that, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek radio-controlled German Early Production Tiger 1. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where you can get updates on new model showcase and project update videos when they get posted. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have more pictures of this particular build since project start, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been posted on the channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks for watching.